Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at Joint Base Lewis-McChord up near Olympia, Washington, and we're honored to have with us Colonel Promotable, or hopefully soon to be Brigadier General Omar Jones, who is the Deputy Commander for Operations of the 7th Infantry Division. Sir, thanks for hosting us today.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you here, and looking forward to the conversation.
I wanted to start off, you guys are an illustrious unit in Army history, obviously a very, very rich history in the Pacific, in combat, in Korea as well, and then in operations all through history. What are the key mission sets that you're bringing? You have 7 brigade combat teams that are under you, as well as the Guard as well. What are the core missions of the 7th Infantry Division?
Well, I'll tell you, before I answer that, I want to tell you the history, because it really is amazing. Last Monday, we celebrated our 99th anniversary, 99th birthday of this division. World War I, World War II, Korea, and most recently, we just had soldiers return from Afghanistan this past summer. But an amazing history and an amazing group of veterans that are still involved in what the division does today. But this patch behind us really is reflective of just incredible Army history over the past 99 years. But what the 7th does today, it is a division headquarters here on Joint Base Lewis-McChord. As you said, we have 7 active duty brigades, and then we are partnered with the 81st Brigade out of the Washington, Oregon, and California National Guard for our 8th Brigade. So by number of brigades, we're the biggest division in the Army. Our responsibility is really focused on building readiness. So it's the training and readiness of those 8 brigades, making sure that they're ready to respond to anything in the Pacific Command area of responsibility, or globally responsive across the world if that's where the Secretary of Defense needs our units to go. So our focus is on every day helping them build readiness to the soldiers, the formations here in the division, and getting them ready if required to go.
The Pacific is in, I've noticed that the Pacific Ocean is right over here. This is the other Washington. They're pretty nearby. And talk to us about the Pacific focus you have with the Pacific Pathways Initiative that General Odierno started, which was lauded in terms of trying to increase engagement in the region. You guys have a major exercise that's ongoing right now in Japan, where your Air Force buddies, as well as elements of your force, are over there exercising. You had Japanese over up in Yakima, where you have a large exercise area in October. What are some of the key things that you guys are doing to build engagement, build partnership capacity in the Pacific?
That is where so much of our focus is on the region. As you know, our Corps headquarters, the 1st U.S. Corps here, works every day with U.S. Army Pacific in Hawaii and focused on our land power across the Pacific region. And really, it's just a number of things. 4 of our 7 active duty brigades are multifunctional brigades. They are here to support the Corps. They're involved today in an exercise in Japan, Yamasakura. So they're both here at our simulation center as well as Japan, where our Corps Commanding General is Lieutenant General Stephen Lanza, where they're working with our partners in Japan and continue to build interoperability, strengthen our relationships, and build our readiness. So a lot of our focus in the division, training at home station, training here on Joint Base Lewis-McChord, out in Yakima to build our readiness. That allows us to do either bilateral exercises with our partners in the Pacific, sometimes there, sometimes here. As you described, we had elements of the 8th Japanese Division here in September for Operation Rising Thunder. Wonderful 2 to 3 week exercise with them. We do core exercises like Yamasakura that's going on now that I already mentioned. And then we do Pacific Pathways. That is something the Army's been doing for 3 to 5 years now, and it takes existing multilateral and bilateral exercises and links them together. So we will have a unit, a Pacific Pathways Task Force, that will conduct these exercises in sequence, sometimes simultaneously, but in sequence, and that also provides a force and a mission commando, leaders who can be responsive if our Pacific Command commander needs them anywhere in the region. So really allows us to continue to build that readiness at home station, the partnerships in the region, the interoperability in the region, but also be responsive to anything across the area of operations.
One of the things which is really neat is you're doing real world training, but also very, very sophisticated interlink training, right? And that's how folks are connecting. How is that changing the training game, giving you that extra flexibility ultimately?
The training has got to be realistic, and we've been saying that as long as there's been an Army. Our training has got to be realistic and got to prepare us for war. But as the world has become more complex, our training has become more complex. I have been all around the Army, and Joint Base Lewis-McChord is just a fantastic set of training resources to allow us to get to that complex training. whether it's individual training or all the way up to training our brigades so that they're able to, again, responsive to in the Pacific region or across the world, but the complexity, making sure it's combined arms, making sure it is joint, both with our Navy and Air Force brothers here in the Pacific Northwest, to bring all those capabilities together, to bring that training to capture the lessons we've had from exercises like Pathways, from our recent operational experience, from our recent combat experience, and bring that together to keep building readiness in the formations every day.
You and I were talking, and we had a fascinating conversation before the interview. You have enormous operational experience in Iraq, in Afghanistan. You're a striker guy, so you helped, bring that capability on, and then use that capability when you were in combat. You had a great CENTCOM job working for General Stone Cold Austin over at CENTCOM, where you were engaged in a lot of the real world issues that are going on, whether in Yemen, whether in Syria, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan as well. And there's this sort of binary debate in sometimes you hear in some circles, where the Army should get to high-intensity warfighting, and then there are folks who are saying, hey, we have to maintain the counterinsurgency. And you had a very, very nuanced view of that is not binary at all, and I think very representative of your generation that did a lot of the fighting. Walk us through what the right approach to this has to be over the long term for the Army.
So the guidance we've gotten from our most senior leaders in the Army, from Secretary of the Army, from the Chief of Staff, is that focus on readiness. Readiness is what the Army's number one priority is, and there's no other priority. There's no other number one priority. And it's about building that inside the formations. And every formation has a list of tasks that they've got to master. And that way, a striker brigade here, a striker brigade at Fort Bliss, Fort Hood, in Germany, there will be masters of those same tasks. And I think that's critical, because wherever the President of the United States, wherever the Secretary of Defense orders us to go, we got to make sure that we're able to do those fundamentals. Because if we do those fundamentals well, whether it is a high-intensity conflict, whether it is a stability operation, we'll be ready to do it. And we're ready to adjust to that environment, because we'll have well-trained leaders, we'll have well-trained soldiers, we'll have well-trained formations that know how to do their jobs, know how to take care of their equipment, and know how to work together as a team. We master those fundamentals here in home station training through the exercises across the Pacific region. We will be successful no matter what we're asked to do.
And so it's not really looking at it as that was a counterinsurgency fight. There are rich lessons in all of that are applicable to anything the Army's doing forward.
I agree 100% with what you just said. It is about leadership, it is about our soldiers, and it's about building teams, and it's about readiness. And if we are doing those things well in home station, well in exercises, we will be successful in any operation we have to perform.
Well, I want to take you over into the Pacific. Generally, when people talk about the anti-access area denial challenge, I want to get your views on both what you've seen the Russians doing, for example, in Ukraine and Donbass region, massed fires, ways they're using unmanned systems, where they're using hybrid capabilities, electronic warfare and all of that. And then also what the Chinese are doing over in the Western Pacific that has some of our allies as concerned, right? I mean, there was a receptive audience to this U.S. engagement, whether it was the Pacific Pivot, you want to talk about what the Navy's doing, the Air Force has been doing, but also what the Army's been doing on the ground. What are the capabilities that the United States Army needs to need as an ops officer to be able to operate in these anti-access area denial bubbles, whether it's in Russia, but particularly in the Pacific?
And I will tell you, it's not as much the capabilities as it is the approach. As we came out of the 1970s and 1980s, we were focused on air-land battle. And that was our doctrine, and we demonstrated so successfully in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and really built the Army that we've had, and it was, continued to be successful in Iraq and Afghanistan. But as we look to what potential adversaries are doing in the world today, it really has to be multi-domain. We've got to look at cyber. We've got to look at space. We've got to look at all the physical domains as well. How does the Army affect those domains, what the Army does on land, but affect the other domains as well? How do we do that in conjunction with our joint partners? How do we do that in conjunction with our international partners? And that's where the Army is going as we're looking to the future, is our role as the dominant land power in the world, working across the multi-domain fight. And so I'm not as concerned about those specific capabilities as I am about bringing all the capabilities of our international partners and the joint force together across all 5 domains. I think that is what's going to make the U.S. joint force continue to be, the most successful military in history.
Do you, one of the things that you experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan was the ability to communicate, right? Your adversary, his capabilities they did show some rather impressive capabilities, but generally we had the ability to talk whenever we wanted to talk and have that kind of connectivity. It's pretty much assured that our Russian friends are unlikely to allow that, and certainly our Chinese friends are working very, very hard to prevent that from happening. From your standpoint, is the training getting, that is a mind, you have a lot of combat experienced officers, but they could communicate freely. They had access to overhead imagery and a whole bunch of other things. They could pick up a phone and get something to fall, hit, move, get. Is the training that you're doing realistic enough to put people into situations where they're not going to have that connectivity, that it is going to be denied, that they're going to have to do this on mission command, even in complex joint environment where the Army may be communicating with the Navy, Army's communicating with the Air Force, and still achieve results in a very difficult situation?
If you look at our combat training centers today, whether National Training Center down at Fort Irwin, Joint Readiness Training Center down at Fort Polk, or Joint Multinational Readiness Center at Hohenfels, Germany, and you look at the threat that those training centers are presenting to the rotational units that are going through, the hybrid threat, as the Army looks at it. That is a compilation of trends we're seeing across the world today, potential adversaries, and it all comes together to get after exactly what you're talking about, so that when we're at those training centers, they are challenged across multiple domains, that they are challenged, that they have to stay mobile, that they have to be able to operate where the electromagnetic spectrum is challenged for them. How can we maintain a small footprint for our mission command nodes, be mobile, be lethal, and get ahead of the enemy? When our combat training centers do that, as they have been doing it for the past few years, that affects our home station training. That affects how we're designing exercises here at home station. It affects the thought process that we take into exercise designs and work with our partners across the Pacific, whether it's pathways or other bilateral, multilateral exercises. So the world today, and more importantly, the world that we think we're going to look at 2025, 2035, 2050, is informing the threat we train against right now. And it does get after all these capabilities you described, that what technology do we need, what skills do we need, and what training do we have to do here to make sure we can defeat that threat.
From a distributed operations standpoint, though, if you look at it, the Army did have distributed operations, for example, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, but yet had all of the attributes, as General Petraeus would like to point out. It was as combined arms as anything. It was just different combined arms than the sort of things that you were doing at Fort Irwin, for example, and at the NTC. In this future, where it's going to be much more distributed units, much harder logistics challenges, how are you guys wrapping your minds around what operations look like when Army guys are on islands, that may be distributed, that may be a little bit harder to resupply, particularly from an ammunition standpoint? I mean, ammunition, last time I checked, isn't getting any lighter ultimately. It's still pretty heavy, especially if you need something that has range, for example, ATACMS, HIMARS, et cetera. What are some of the ways you guys are thinking about this challenge of how you can get units that are dispersed over a vast area to be able to whether it's to deliver fires or to deliver capability over longer protracted distances?
I will tell you, every single pathways rotation, we do exactly that. So you have a brigade leadership out there with a battalion task force, usually operating across 2 to 3 countries, getting after distributed mission command, making sure the systems work, but also the key part of mission command in terms of how those leaders interact, the trust they've built, and the understanding that those leaders at echelon, they know what their chain of command wants them to do, and they know they're empowered to make it happen as they're operating across multiple countries, across vast distances across the Pacific Ocean. The sustainment requirement, whether it is ammunition, whether it is fuel, whether it is food and water, anything else, that really allows us to exercise all of those systems while we're out there doing the pathways. So it is wonderful for interoperability. It is wonderful for building relationships for our partners. But it's first and foremost about our readiness. Our soldiers understanding how to work with partners and operating in the human domain, but then all those other things that we're exercising by having a battalion and a brigade headquarters move about the Pacific, sustain themselves, train in multiple locations simultaneously, allows them to prepare for what could be future operations anywhere else.
You talked about readiness, and you've talked about that and the priority on that. But one of the challenges with maintaining readiness has been the Budget Control Act. That has had an impact. We've talked to commanders up in this region, but also in Washington about the challenges that folks face. From your standpoint, what are some of the challenges you guys have faced? What are some of the trade-offs you guys have had to make to ensure that every available dollar is going toward that readiness that's such a high priority?
I'll tell you, you've probably heard our Army leadership talk about the challenges, modernization as look to the future, and the challenge of having a predictable, consistent funding flow and how important that is to the Army. But here in 7th ID, for us, the biggest challenge is time. Being able to do the training we want to do to make sure we can achieve the readiness that our units need to achieve to support the potential missions that are out there and to support the directed exercises that are out there as well. So it is getting the soldiers with their equipment to master that equipment, and then just getting the repetition and the training that they can do here at home station. That's really where our focus ends up being. We have the resources we need to do that inside the division, and I know our senior leaders are working the resources across the Army, across Forces Command, for all the units in the formation to be able to do that.
If there is an expectation that the next president, President Trump, is going to work to increase defense spending. The Republican leadership has already expressed an interest in scrapping the Budget Control Act, which there will be a lot of rejoicing over when it happens, assuming it happens. And even though some like Lindsey Graham are sounding the alarm that's saying, hey, look, it's not going to be as much money as everybody thinks, but there is a sense there's going to be more money. If there is more money, and the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General Milley, called you and said, hey, General Jones, what do you need? Or let's not jump the gun. Colonel Jones, what do you need? What are some of the things that you think, as the ops officer of the 7th Infantry Division, would be priorities? What are things that you would like to spend a little bit more money on if you had a little bit more money?
I will tell you, in the 6 months that I've been here in this job, I have not felt constrained by resources. I really have not. And I know the Army as an enterprise, is communicated to our leaders on the Hill, our leaders in the Department of Defense, in terms of those Army-level resource requirements. But here it really comes down to, we got the training resources we need. We have the equipment and the personnel that we need to train. It is about that repetition. It is about getting there to train. So if there was an ability to have more time to train, more days in the week, more hours in the day, while still giving our soldiers the time they need to recharge their batteries and take care of their families, that would be the one resource that's hardest to give, but that I think we need. It's just that ability to continue to improve our readiness through repetition.
And what is the readiness rating that is on your unit? A couple of years ago, folks were talking about, very few of the units were ready. Mm-hmm. Are you satisfied that the units that are in your division are ready to go if the word comes to them? Of
course, you can always get better. And we look at it every single day in terms of, our training readiness, our equipment readiness, our soldier readiness. Are they ready to go? Yes. But we will keep pushing to get better every day. And that's the charge that my commanding general and our senior leadership have given us, and we will keep working to improve readiness.
Spoken like a true Army leader, that there's always, no matter how high your score is, there's always a way that you can do better. Anybody who's watching that should be inspirational. You were involved with Stryker from the very, very beginning. That was a program, that was an interim program originally when the Army said it, but it was really a massive intellectual shift in terms of how the Army was going to think about the future and trying to skate to where the puck is in terms of the capabilities the force needed for the future. It was a capability that when it started coming online was criticized and said that this was not the right vehicle, but ultimately really proved itself in combat. What does the Stryker bring to the force, not just today, but you expect the Stryker to be bringing the force? And what are some of the experiences you had with it in combat that give you such confidence in the system?
I will tell you, I'm going to walk away from the platform a bit, only because I think what was most powerful about the Stryker brigades in the beginning, and is most powerful about them today and will be in the future, is it is about the formation. And it's about the capabilities they bring. And it's about when the Stryker ramp drops, there is a 9-person squad that comes out of the back of that. They have good situational awareness. They have been able to get there in a rapid fashion because of the tactical and operational mobility of the vehicle. And they have phenomenal firepower coming off that vehicle to be able to support them. But it's about that squad. And that squad that comes out has trained together as a team. They have deployed together as a team and are ready to fight together as a team. That was the focus of the Stryker brigades in the beginning. I arrived here in 2004, so a couple years after the first Strykers arrived on JBLM. I was in Stryker Brigade number 2, and I ended up deploying with that formation 3 times, twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan. And in every single one of those experiences, it was about the squad and it was about the formation. The platform itself demonstrated it's very survivable. We saw that in both theaters. Its mobility, as I already talked about, both tactically but also operationally, to be able to move across the country. I was in Fallujah in November of 2004, and we were fighting on a Thursday night. We were up in Mosul by Saturday morning, fighting in Mosul. But that operational mobility to move across the theater is just absolutely fantastic. When we look back to the early days of strikers, as we looked at what the world needed, what capability, the capability gap in the United States Army at the time, and what capabilities we needed, and then we put a formation in place to fill that gap and provide those capabilities. I see the Army doing that today. Let's look at the world. What capabilities do we need out there? And let's make sure the capabilities match the world and the threats that are out there, frankly, based on our own national interests. And that's a discussion that, from what I see, is happening today.
And, it's interesting that a couple of times in the discussion you've mentioned that the most important thing is getting the thinking right about the future rather than worry necessarily about the equipment. And that's the position the Army leadership has taken. What do you think some of the keys are to thinking about that future ultimately as the service sort of takes this breathing moment to really intellectually consider what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years looks like in terms of the capabilities that will then inform the platforms that it needs?
First, I would contest a breathing moment. I don't think there's a soldier in the Army you could ask about a breathing moment. The Army is as busy now as it ever has been across the entire world. I was counting today, this division has soldiers in over 12 plus countries right now, as we're talking, across multiple combatant commanders' areas of operation, across their theaters. But I think that thinking about what the world looks like, as the Chief of Staff and the Secretary talk about what is the world going to look like beyond 2025, beyond 2035 to 2050, and getting our brightest minds thinking about that and then building towards that. I think as we do that and we talk capabilities, the formations and the associated platforms and equipment, that will follow on. But understanding the best we can, what does the world look like in the future, and then what does the United States need in that future, I think is absolutely critical.
About increasing the size of the force. I mean, obviously that's something that the president-elect has discussed. We don't fully know the plans, but there is talk that, numerically things have got to increase. Let's increase the size of the force. And some of the size increases that are being discussed are rather large increases that would actually bring the Army to even a higher end strength than it was, or nearly as high or even higher, in the last Iraq and Afghanistan conflict. From your standpoint, is it going to be easy to increase the size of the force at this point without necessarily damaging readiness ultimately, given that all the focus has been on let's make sure that we have as much resources going to this force? What are potentially the challenges from the standpoint of an operational commander as the force starts to increase? Are there any concerns that something falls off the plate as that force is growing and increasing?
Inside this division, my focus is on making sure that our formations are manned the way they need to be. We have the soldiers now, but obviously making sure that we've got enough soldiers to fill out the entire formation for all 7 brigades and our partner brigade, our National Guard brigade. That would really be where the focus is here on JBLM, is making sure that every single formation, every squad, platoon, company, battalion, brigade is manned so that when they go out and train, they've got everybody that they would go to war with. Absolutely critical.
And so far, do you have enough people in all of those billets?
You never have enough people. we do have the people we need to build the readiness that we need to build. But the more people, the more manned, the more fully manned the formations are, the more ready they're going to be.
Sir, thanks very much. Real honor speaking to you.
Thank you for the time. Thank you very much.